Okay, Paul, so here we are in the month of April, and as usual, let's start with our look at the planets. So, Mercury. Well, Mercury doesn't start off very well, does it? It's a
No.
poor position in the morning sky.
Yes,
Um,
it's a bit poor this month. The best time to see it is probably at the end of the month. It's available 30 minutes after sunset, but even that's going to be quite low. It's going to be quite a challenge to see it this month, I think.
yeah, that on the 25th of April, actually worth mentioning that at magnitude minus 1.5, Mercury sits 1.2 degrees northwest of mag minus 3.8 Venus. So that could be a good way to try and locate both planets. But they remain closed for the rest of the month. And yeah, by the end of the month, Mercury shines at mag minus 1.1, which is actually pretty bright for Mercury. That's not too bad.
It is, but it always seems to be the case that when it's bright, it's really low down.
Yeah, well, it sets 85 minutes after the sun actually on the 30th, so it's not too bad.
It's not hopeless, no. It's worth trying. A little better is the planet Venus. It's now returned to our evening skies. It was at superior conjunction in the end of March, but unfortunately, it's going to take a long time to become anything like a reasonable object in the night sky again. From the 30th of April, it's available about 20 minutes after the sun. You should be able to see it, but again quite low down, and it's going to take a long time to emerge from the evening twilight to become a prominent object. I think we were spoiled by the 2020 western elongation, to be honest.
That's the way it goes with Venus, isn't it? You get a good one in the evening, and then that's followed by a poor one in the evening because it sits in a part of the ecliptic, which means that it will be forever low, basically, in the evening sky. So it's never going to get particularly high up like it did in 2020. But it will have a good separation from the sun, of course. So if you're able to find it during the day,
Yes.
that might be a better way to locate it. It's just that in the evening, it's going to be pretty poor. And it often gets missed, actually, when it's like this because it's so low down that it's not obvious and it can hide behind buildings and trees.
No, that's right. And I think this is the time, if you are reasonably, comfortable with observing the sky during the daytime, to have a go at trying to observe Venus during the day, particularly sort of early afternoon, mid-afternoon. Often the seeing is quite good then.
Yes.
And if you've got setting circles, you can offset from the sun, being very careful, of course, to mind the sun, make sure you don't catch it even with the finder scope. But often you get some periods of very good seeing in the late afternoon, particularly in summer, when the temperatures have settled down a bit, and you can get some really good views of Venus during the day. I do most of my Venus work during the day. I rarely touch it in the evenings. It's a daytime object.
And of course, as it's to the east of the sun, that's also a fail-safe position because if you're on Venus and your drive fails for whatever reason on your telescope, the telescope isn't going to, or the sun isn't going to move into the field of view. It's going to move away from you. So that's quite useful.
Yes, and that makes it safer.
Yes, it does. It's also worth mentioning that Venus and the waxing crescent moon will be quite close together. There's a number of opportunities where that will happen over the coming months. This month, on the 12th of April, it will be tricky. There'll be another one next month on the 13th of May. That'll be a bit easier. And then on the evenings of the 11th and 12th of June, there'll be a fabulous opportunity to see the thin lunar crescent near Venus. And that will repeat in July. So there's certainly those meetings of the waxing crescent moon and Venus are coming up. And they're really popular because people like to photograph them and they're bright enough to capture with things like a smartphone, for example.
Yes, but if you want to do you sort of what I call serious observing, where you want to record the features, cloud features of Venus, the phase anomaly, things like that, you're going to need to do telescopic work, and that is probably best done during the daytime for this elongation.
Yeah, agreed.
Moving out then, Mars. Oh, we've had a wonderful opposition of Mars. Do you know, Pete, I think this has been my best opposition of Mars. I have made over 120 drawings of the planet.
Wow.
We're recording this in March, and that's the most number of drawings I've ever... I even dream about the planet now. I can see the entire surface. It's well past its best, but if you've got a larger telescope and you either a visual or imaging, there's still stuff you can see because it's now springtime in the northern hemisphere, so the northern cap is melting and producing a lot of volatiles into the thin Martian atmosphere. atmosphere. So we're getting a lot of brilliant white clouds that are visible, and you don't need really good resolution to see that because they're so brilliant in contrast against the surface of Mars. So plenty still to see if you've got access to a larger telescope.
That's right. It's pretty small, though, I have to say, isn't it? The disk is going to be 5.3 to 4.7 arc seconds over the course of the month. So that's not massive at all. But yeah, if you've got a big telescope and the seeing is steady, you can start to make out some of those brighter patches because they're quite extensive, aren't they?
They are. They can extend. So on the morning or evening terminator, they can extend from the North Polar Cap or the South Polar Cap all the way round on the evening limb or the morning limb. They will catch. They often condense over the mountainous region or the volcanoes, so you can get big displays of them then. And one of the things to note now, really, is that we're coming into springtime proper. Often you get periods of very good seeing, and Mars is a very red object, so it will be less disturbed. And so you might well eke out the Mars apposition a little longer with periods of good seeing, even though the disk size, as you say, the apparent diameter is incredibly small now.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth doing. I've never observed Mars at 4.7 arc seconds before, so this will be a first for me.
Okay, well, good luck with that. Okay, let's go to the gas giants then, Jupiter and Saturn. And they're both morning planets at the moment. Jupiter rises 70 minutes before the sun at the start of the month, but it's poorly placed and doesn't achieve much of an altitude. There's a 22% lit waning crescent moon 5.7 degrees south of Jupiter on the morning of 7th of April. Yeah, it's never going to get particularly high at the moment, is it?
No, although we should say it will be better this year than it has been for the last 3 or 4 years.
Yes.
It is going to be higher in the sky this year. I'm hoping it will clear the houses this time rather than just go back and forth between the gaps in the houses. But as you say, not particularly well high. We do have mutual phenomena going on this year, though. So every 6 years, we're in the equatorial plane of Jupiter, and as a result, the satellites of Jupiter appear to eclipse and go behind or in front of each other along with their shadows, and that can be very, very interesting and I think it's just a nice thing to watch, to be honest.
Yeah, there are a number of those coming up, which I'm covering in the magazine Sky Guide, and they're good for all different sizes of instrument. If you've got a big instrument with imaging capability, it's often possible to actually record the moons, or the 4 Galilean moons of Jupiter, as tiny disks, and you can actually see when a shadow of one moon goes across another. But if you've got a smaller instrument, then it's still possible to see these mutual events, because if you have an eclipse, for example, of one moon by the shadow of another, as you see them as dots next to Jupiter, that moon that's being eclipsed will just dim for a period and then come back up again. So there's lots to look forward to in this sort of scenario when we've got mutual events happening.
Yeah, it's quite a nice thing to watch out for. We'll also have things like the Great Red Spot and other storms and things on Jupiter, so there's plenty to see. And you do sometimes get moments of good seeing in summer, and spring. Spring is, as I said earlier, is a good time to be doing planet watching, because you often get these periods, very, very calm periods of seeing, especially in the early hours of the morning.
Yeah, okay. Well, Saturn is fairly close to Jupiter still at the moment, although they are gradually separating. At the beginning of the month, they're about 12 degrees apart. And Saturn manages to attain an altitude of around 13 degrees before it's lost in the brightening dawn twilight. So that's getting better. Saturn is improving too, isn't it? I mean, it's now gone past the lowest, the most southerly part of the ecliptic, and it's in the constellation of Capricornus, so it's gradually climbing higher, but it's a bit slower than Jupiter.
Yeah, so Jupiter takes about 12 years to go around the sun, so it spends about a year in each of the zodiacal constellations. Unfortunately, Saturn takes about 30 years to go around the sun, so it is going to be in the constellations for a long time. But as you say, we are past the worst of it, and it is steadily improving. In fact, I had some good views of it last year, and again, I might well try and catch it in the morning sky when the seeing's good, to get some images of it, because I think some drawings of it. I think we are approaching a time when we will be due for a big white storm, a big white oval on Saturn. So it's well worth keeping an eye out, because they happen at roughly 30-year intervals. You get these big white ovals that erupt in Saturn's equatorial zone, and we're about due for one. So best to keep an eye, either visual or electronic, on Saturn.
Yeah, okay. Well, the ice giants, Uranus and Neptune, aren't really visible this month. That's a pity with Uranus, actually, because on the 23rd of April, it sits between Venus and Mercury. But it's just probably going to be too dim. It's good to say it like that, because somebody will probably go out and prove us wrong, which is excellent.
Prove you wrong. I'm not making the claim.
oh, thanks. Camaraderie there. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the special events which are happening. So if you've got clear skies on the morning of the 6th of April, look low above the southeast horizon roughly an hour before sunrise to catch a 31% lit waning crescent moon near to magnitude plus 0.9 Saturn, and you've got magnitude minus 1.9 Jupiter further on to the east. And it's on the next morning, on the 7th, that the moon, which will then be a 22% lit waning lunar crescent, will be really close to Jupiter. So it's going to pass both of those planets on the 6th and 7th of April.
Yes, that'd be a nice one to try and catch. What interests me is the event on the 12th of April. This is going to be a very tricky observation because it occurs in the early hours. And between 0522 and 0536 BST, Io's shadow will cross the face of the outer Galilean moon, Callisto. Now, Jupiter's altitude will be just 3.5 degrees above the east-southeast horizon at the time, so it will be an incredibly challenging observation to make. But if you can get it, I think that will be worth it, particularly as events involving Ganymede and Callisto are quite rare because they're much further out from Jupiter.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say that, and I think that's makes it worth having a go for, but 3.5 degrees is quite low down, so that's a tricky one.
Blade of grass might get in the way on the distant field.
Have to get out and cut the lawn. This on the 13th, look out for a beautiful 2% lit waxing crescent moon. That's pretty thin, 2%.
It is.
Which will be low in the west shortly after sunset. And as time goes on and the sky darkens, the moon should start to show its night side, gently glowing by the reflected light of the Earth. That's Earthshine. That's called. Also known as the old moon in the young moon's arms.
Yes, I do that. I just think always Earthshine sounds like some dodgy homemade brew. You want a glass of Earthshine?
Well, that's ruined it. Okay.
That's ruined it.
Well, actually, this is a good time of year to be looking out for waxing crescent moons because they're well positioned after sunset. And on the 14th, there's a nice example of that, where the 6% lit waxing crescent moon can be seen above the west-northwest horizon as the evening twilight darkens. And then on the following evening, the moon will be 12% lit and sitting between the Hyades and Pleiades open cluster. So that's quite an attractive thing to look for, or try and take a photograph of even.
Yes. It'd be a nice thing to view. On the 18th, we have a nice occultation because starting from around 0115 BST, this morning's 27% lit waxing moon begins to occult an open cluster, M35 in Gemini. The open cluster is about magnitude 5.5, and much of the cluster is going to be hidden by the moon's surface. So that'd be interesting to watch. I haven't seen one of those for a long time, actually.
The 27% lit waxing crescent moon is still quite bright, but of course it'll be the dark edge that begins the occultation, and then the cluster stars will come out from behind the bright edge. So if you've got a telescope on it, it should be quite easy to see that, shouldn't it?
It should, yeah. It should be quite an interesting thing to view. As I say, I haven't seen an occultation like that by the moon for quite a while. Okay,
well, if you've got a telescope and you're looking at the moon's surface, there are a number of clear obscure effects which are happening this month as well. On the 19th, around 2230 BST, that's 2130 UT, you might be able to see the head and neck of Nessie, which is in the crater Ptolemaeus, and it's an unusual shadow cast by the rim of Ptolemaeus. And as the rim sort of creates this peak, it interacts with a smaller crater inside Ptolemaeus called Ammonius, which is 8 kilometers in diameter. And together, the sort of dark shadows from that rim section of Ptolemaeus and from Ammonius create what looks a bit like, do you know what I mean? The surgeon's photo of Nessie, where it looks like the neck and the head coming out of Loch Ness.
Yeah, the very famous version of Nessie, the picture that was deemed to be the great evidence for it. Yes,
Even though it was a fake.
even though it's a fake. Yeah, but it
Yeah,
always
okay.
looked like a fake to me, to be honest. But
It's like
yes,
someone's hand coming out
it
of the
is.
lock.
Presumably,
But
this particular Clair Obscura looks like that.
it does. Actually, it suits really bad seeing and poor or low magnification. So if you've got a small telescope, it's ideal looking for this one.
Ideal for any kind of observation in Britain, then, really.
Oh, that's cruel. On the 20th, there's another Clair Obscura effect known as the Eyes of Clavius, where it's the rims of two of the larger craterlets inside the main crater catches the sunlight of the lunar dawn, and they look like rings inside the dark shadow which is in Clavius itself. So that can be seen around 22:20 BST on the 20th of April. And that's, as I say, a Clair Obscura effect known as the Eyes of Clavius.
Okay. On the 22nd of April, we have the peak of the Lyrid meteor shower, but unfortunately, the peak occurs in daytime at 1400 BST, and this year's shower will be compromised by the bright moon that is producing all your nice Clair Obscura effects. So, best to observe on the nights of the 21st and the 22nd, and the 22nd and 23rd. So, probably only see the brightest meteors, but you never know what might happen. We had that bright meteor fairly recently, so it might be a good thing to watch out for.
Yeah, it sort of breaks a long period of no meteor showers, so it's worth having a go for. But I think that bright moon is going to cause a lot of trouble there. There's also another Clair Obscura effect actually on the 22nd, which occurs in the morning, which is often a popular one which people pick up and photograph. And then they point it out and say, "Oh, what's that happening there?" And that's when you've got the Jura Mountains catching the early light from the sun, and that causes a sort of ring effect or a curved arc of light hanging into the lunar terminator near the Bay of Rainbows, Sinus Iridum, and that's known as the jeweled handle. And then which is a very nice effect. But there's another one which is less noted, which occurs on the 23rd of April in the evening. And it's a little bright starlight glow, which is near the crater Aristarchus. And if you can see that, that's another Clair Obscura effect, which is known as the star-tipped mountain.
I've never seen that, no, but it doesn't surprise me because Aristarchus is one of the brightest craters on the lunar surface, and in particular, that mountain at the center of Aristarchus is incredibly bright. So
it's actually outside of the crater itself. I think from memory, it's Mons Herodotus, which is being illuminated.
That whole plateau is quite bright.
Yes, it is.
So yeah, I've never seen that, so I might look out for that myself.
Yeah, it'd be quite a nice thing to go for. Okay, well, on the 25th of April, there's a lot of things going on this month, aren't there? If you have a flat northwest horizon, you might be able to spot magnitude minus 1.5 Mercury, just a degree from mag minus 3.8 Venus. I've already mentioned this. But despite both planets being really bright, they will be pretty challenging as they set about 40 minutes after the sun.
Yes, and on the evening of the 26th of April, magnitude 1.5 Mars lies just 1.6 degrees north of that open cluster in Gemini M35.
That's the one that was occulted by the moon earlier in the month. In fact, talking of the moon, on the 27th, April's full moon occurs in the early hours, about 12 hours ahead of perigee, which means it'll appear brighter and larger than an average full moon. But of course, if you weren't told that was happening, the difference in size between April's full moon and the one that occurred in March and the one which is going to occur in May will be so minimal you wouldn't see any difference. But they will appear brighter than an average full moon and larger than an average full moon.
And what's this particular super moon called? Has it got a name?
The April supermoon.
There we go. You heard it here first, folks.
They all have names. They all have month names. I don't pay a lot of attention to that. It seems to be a popular thing these days. But no, the full moon is an interesting time when the moon is there because you don't get many shadow features. But unless you've actually got an eclipse of the moon occurring, there is always an edge of the moon where the terminator can be seen. And it's quite interesting with a telescope looking at the edge of the moon and seeing if you can see where the terminator is.
Yeah, particularly if it lies along the near to the southern mountains on the moon. Then you can just make out the little peaks, so you can tell that the limb is not perfectly flat and smooth. It's
fascinating.
Yeah,
and it's a fascinating thing to actually take a photograph of it and try and decode what the features are that you can see there, because foreshortening makes them appear all together when they're actually in reality on the disk of the moon, on the globe of the moon rather, they would be spread apart by quite a long distance. But this foreshortening just brings them all together, and it makes it really difficult to decode what's what. So that's a good challenge if you're up for it.
Indeed.
Okay, so let's now head out into the night sky. Well, before we say that, we ought to point out that daylight is expanding quite rapidly because we have the equinox in late March, and that's the time of year when the rate of decrease in the length of darkness is at its highest for the year. So it's really noticeable as you're going through into early April and through the month that the length of night decreases quite dramatically.
Yes, and there's some subtle spring stars that will start to appear. This is a great time if you're a deep sky observer, because high in the south is the constellation of Leo as darkness falls. And in between Leo and Virgo, we have the realm of the galaxy. In fact, there's a lot of galaxies here that small telescopes will reveal. It always amazes me that you've got these galaxies so far away are actually easily revealed, and you can see some structure in them just with a small telescope.
Yes, you can. I mean, you've got the three galaxies in the belly of Leo the Lion, which are M95, M96, and M105, but probably better targets for structure would be the Leo triplet. So you've got M65, M66, and NGC 3628, which is a fainter member of the triplet, and it's got a sort of rectangular shape because it's an edge-on spiral, unbarred spiral galaxy.
And it's that dust lane, isn't it, that goes through it that gives it this sort of very oblong-y type shape.
Yeah, and because of that, because it's got this dust lane that runs down the middle of it, it's often called the hamburger galaxy. But it's also known as Sarah's galaxy as well.
Right. Do you know why?
I think it's named after a poet. It's actually quite difficult to track down where that name came from. Yeah, I think Sarah's galaxy is the official, that sort of unofficial name, shall I say, whereas the hamburger galaxy is just a made-up nickname, which has caught on because it looks a bit like a hamburger. But it's interesting what you were saying about seeing it with small telescopes, because these galaxies are very susceptible to any haze. So if you've got good dark skies and which are really clear and free from haze, then they can be seen quite well, so long as you give yourself good time to dark adapt as well. So keep your eyes in darkness for about 20 minutes or so, and probably use a low power to sort of give as much light coming in as possible.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. And these are easy to find because M65 and 66 and NGC 3628, they're located near the sort of midpoint of the Leo the Lion's back leg.
That's right. It's just, it's sort of in the leg is in two parts, and it's just north of the joint of the rear leg, if that makes any sense at all, if you can recognise where Leo's leg would be. But yeah, they are pretty easy to pick up. And you can see them with binoculars. You can see them in 10 by 50s. But again, you've got to have a dark sky, and it's got to be clear of any haze to actually pick them up.
Yeah, it's quite a contrast to planetary and lunar observing, where a bit of haze is actually a good thing because often means seeing's very, very good.
Oh, the
Whereas with
mistiness for planets, yeah.
yeah, whereas with deep sky, the seeing can be rubbish, and it could be long as it's really transparent. That's what matters more. It's quite a different philosophy for observing.
Yes, it is indeed. Okay, well, immediately east of Leo is faint Coma Berenices, or Queen Berenice's hair. And that's a nice constellation, which also benefits from a good dark sky because it's pretty faint. It's sort of made up of a triangular shaped open cluster known as Melot 111, which defines most of the constellation.
Yes, and there's even more faint galaxies here. So if you're doing a galaxy hunting evening and you've just finished with those in Leo, there's a wonderful edge-on galaxy called NGC 4565. It's about 3.5 degrees southeast of Gamma, and heading south, the galaxies come thick and fast for this region because we enter the realm of the galaxies, and a lot of the misty objects that appear concentrated between Der Nebula, which is Beta Leonis, and a semicircular asterism, which of course is known as the Bowl of Virgo. And in this region are loads of galaxies. In fact, you're hard pressed not to see galaxies if you turn your telescope onto this region of the sky.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it's quite fascinating once you start to see them to use the galaxies to galaxy hop to other galaxies, and that becomes really compelling. It's an amazing thing to do because you start to see all their different shapes and brightnesses, etc., and it's just amazing. There's a bright elliptical galaxy there called M87, and you've got M86, which is 1.2 degrees to the west-northwest of M87. But there's also another, or that M86 rather, is part of a famous arrangement, isn't it? It's the Markarian's chain, which is something which is very popular for astrophotography, but it's made up of this beautiful sort of straight line and a curve of galaxies of all different shapes and sizes.
Yes, you've got really a cosmological zoo in the Bowl of Virgo. There is, as you say, there's the giant elliptical galaxy M87. There's spiral galaxies, barred spiral galaxies. Pretty much every type of galaxy you could want to imagine lies in there, and it's interesting just how much structure can be seen. I mean, I've seen reasonable structure in some of these galaxies in just a 4.5-inch reflector from a dark sky.
Yeah.
So there is plenty to see here, even if you have a small telescope.
Okay. Well, if we head north from the Bowl of Virgo through Coma Berenices, you'll eventually arrive at a pair of stars, one relatively bright, one dim, which define the constellation of Canes Venatici, the hunting dogs. The brightest star there is Corcaroli, or Alpha, Canum Venaticorum, and the dimmer one is Chara, which is Beta. But Canes Venatici it plays host to some really fantastic galaxies. You've got M63, the Sunflower Galaxy, and near to the star at the end of the saucepan's handle, that's Alcade, is M51, the Whirlpool Galaxy, which again is a nice, easy galaxy to see with a small telescope, and you can see it with binoculars as well.
Yes, in fact, even from I don't live too far from a main city. M51 is still visible quite easily in binoculars, so it's worth it. That wonderful spiral shape it's got, can't really tell too much of that visually, but it does come out very well in images, doesn't it? And the whole star-forming regions that can be captured as well.
Yeah, and its companion, of course.
Yes.
Which is interacting with it. Okay, well, Canes Venatici is a small constellation south of we call it the saucepan, don't we? The plough. Get into trouble for calling it the saucepan, but it does look like a saucepan. You don't see an awful lot of old-fashioned ploughs hanging around. You see a lot of saucepans. But whatever you want to call it, that's an asterism, which is located wholly within Ursa Major, the Great Bear, and it represents the bear's rear end and long tail, the tail being the handle of the saucepan or the plough, whatever you want to call it. Now, with a bit of imagination, I don't know if you've done this, Paul, but it's possible to extend the pan of the saucepan away from the handle and it actually creates what looks like a frying pan. It's sort of there are another couple of stars there.
Oh, further along, yes, yeah, I
Which
can see
further,
that. Yeah, I can imagine that. Yeah.
and if you keep going, you arrive at a star which sort of makes a point. If you extended the top and bottom edge of the frying pan, they converge to a point at a star called Muscada, which is Omicron Ursa Majoris. And if you want to go back to Ursa Major, which is the Great Bear, Muscada marks the position of the bear's head. I don't know why it's marked by a point, but there you go.
Well, the three pair of stars that mark three of the bear's paws, and with imagination, the entire constellation can be visualized. It does look a bit like a bear from the dark sky to me.
Oh, it does, yeah.
Yeah, it is one of those constellations that bears a reasonable amount of similarity to what it's actually called.
Yeah, absolutely. And between the middle paw and Leo lies the small diamond-shaped constellation of Leo Minor, the little lion. Actually, it looks a bit like a sort of diamond with a tail coming off it, but it's really pretty obscure. And it's actually, I suspect it's quite glad because it's quite close to Lynx, which is the Lynx, which runs west of Leo Minor to the northwest, past the Great Bear's Head. And it was said that Lynx was so named because you need to have the sharp eyes of a lynx to see anything of interest here, which is a pretty fair description. So there's plenty to see this month. In fact, there's a hell of a lot, isn't there, in terms of special events
There
and
is.
things. So get outside, enjoy the night sky, even though the night sky time is beginning to shrink, and get some observations done.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Paul.